Okay, I think we'll get started. So good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to the inaugural meetup for this academic year of the EfL LearningShared community. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alan Wood. I'm one of the co-founders and directors at Evidence for Learning, and it's my pleasure to introduce and kick off today's meeting. And I thank you for your time this afternoon. We've got an ambitious agenda. A fantastic agenda, actually, with some brilliant speakers. So I'm going to press ahead. We've essentially divided today's session or meeting into three parts. I'm going to start with some brief updates on Evidence for Learning, a little bit about what's been happening on the app front, what are some of the exciting developments, what are some things we've done, what some things are coming up. I'm then going to hand over to Alistair, my colleague Alistair Crawford, who's going to introduce the LearningShared CPLD offer and the program that we've put together for this academic year. And then from there, we'll go on to the main event, which is the mini conference, which will hopefully serve as something of a taster of the program and some of the events that we've got planned for later in the week, later in the year, sorry. So on to the updates. You'll know that hopefully you'll know that when you're using Evidence for Learning at the moment, you have an app that you can use for school colleagues, so for teachers, teaching staff, support staff, and so on. And then you have the family app. Well, I'm delighted to say that we've now officially launched the Learner app and the Guest app. So these are available. And if you're interested in learning more about those, then please just get in touch with us. And we'll be really happy to show you how those work and talk to you about how you can add those to your existing subscriptions. That's the first update. The next updates, I've got a list of updates. Just wait for the page to change. There we go. A couple of really exciting ones here, actually. Some of you that have had conversations with us will be aware of this already, but one of the big developments that our team did over the summer was to combine the logins for the admin area and the web console. So the good news is that as of now, you no longer need to have a separate web address and separate login for the admin area of your Evidence for Learning system. So you can log in directly from the web console. So that web address that has the domain, you can log in there. And from there, if you've given appropriate people the permissions for the admin area, then those people can log straight into the admin area from there. We've also developed a new type of reports, which we'll just show you a quick example of, because I know a number of people wanted within their PDFs to be able to show multiple points of assessment in their report. So here's an example using MAP. And so this is a new type of report that you can generate from the web console. Again, if you need any help with any of this stuff, then just reach out to us to get in touch. Just going back to the list, we've got some new features around assessment books, where you can now link assessment books to groups. Some of these are administrative functions, but they'll be really useful and hopefully save you lots of time. There's some updates there on the Android app where you can now access and record assessments directly inside the app rather than having to link off to the web page. And the other thing that's been a really nice feature, and lots of schools have commented on this, for those of you that are integrating Evidence for Learning with your MIS, you can now pull the profile pictures of learners through from the MIS into Evidence for Learning. I've got an example here so you can see what it looks like, but it just gives you that ability to see who it is you're working with when you're inside the app. So it's great if you've got teachers or support staff that are new to working with particular learners, they can see who it is they're working with. Again, if you need any help with any of this stuff, please do get in touch. We've also done some extra work around the assessment books in terms of bulk assessments. Again, please get in touch if you've got any questions for that. I would like to take a couple of minutes just to fill you in on some of the developments that we've got coming up. We've done a lot of work over the summer on what we're calling the PLG Wizard Builder. So what this is going to do is make it much easier for your staff to create and manage PLGs without making mistakes. So you know how they might spell things wrong or use the wrong prefixes. This is just going to make that whole process a lot easier. You'll be able to manage and edit templates as well. So that's something that we're hoping to release this term. And then beyond that, we've been doing a lot of work, particularly around insights, but looking at more effective ways of using evidence and using some of the other data that you've got within evidence for learning, and really being able to use the, I guess, use that evidence to be able to better support some of the processes that you've got in play over the school in terms of school improvement. Evidence for learning, for those of you that have heard me speak, I preach it like a mantra. Evidence for learning has always been about so much more than assessment. Really, at its heart, what it's about doing is creating this very, very rich, vivid picture of what learning looks like within your school. And it's really about trying to help you as schools to develop that progression narrative. And so a lot of these new features that we're developing are really aimed at supporting that process. You can go to the next slide, please, Alistair. The idea here is like I said, from our perspectives in developing evidence for learning, what we're trying to do is to come up with ways that the app is going to really support some of these key processes. How do we answer some of these questions? And these are questions that some of our colleagues today are going to be talking about as part of their sessions. What I would like to do, just before I do hand over to Alistair, is I pulled together some numbers. And there's just a little bit of information about the LearningShared community. So we've now got, I guess, looking at the number of specialist settings across England, we've got probably just somewhere between 75–80% of the sector are now using evidence for learning. And we're really proud of that. But also, like I said, really eager to support each and every school in their endeavours. What's particularly interesting is that we're now seeing growing numbers of mainstream schools coming on board and working with evidence for learning, and in many cases whole multi-academy trusts. And so, as I said, the real focus now is how can we better support you in some of these endeavors that you've got? How do we help you better describe what it is that you're doing with your learners? And there's some pretty big numbers there, but I think the most interesting thing is really the size of the community and the quality that there is within that community. And that's really brings us to the main focus for today, which is really the LearningShared CPLD offer and looking at some of the things that we've put in place for today. So at this point, I'd really love to hand over to Alistair Crawford. For those of you who don't know, Alistair's the director of SEND at St Martin's and St Andrews schools. He's also co-chair of the National Network of Specialist Provision, and he's also a member of the regional team for Whole School SEND. But aside from that, Alice has been really quite key and instrumental in leading the curation of a lot of the resources and events for the LearningShared programme. So he's the perfect person to really take us through this next stage of today. So over to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Alan. And just watching the kind of numbers go up here whilst we think about the power of community and how we can harness the kind of the experience and expertise on this call. And I know that on the call today we have already over 140 people. There are over 300 people who are signed up and will receive a recording of this there. So that's powerful in itself. And when we look at the colleagues who are with us today and signed up, we have MAT CEOs, we have head teachers, deputies, subject leaders, teachers, teaching assistants. So, really that's what we're all about here, is how can we bring that knowledge and expertise and find shared solutions. We know it's an incredibly difficult landscape out there for a number of reasons that I won't go into, we haven't got time to go into today, but I think when we put the collective wisdom and expertise within here, we certainly can find some of those shared solutions. Just ask colleagues if you can make sure your microphone's on mute. That would really help, just avoid any sort of background noise that we have. When we think about the community, we'll look at those things there. We had some really successful events last year. There were well over 100 schools who were signed up to the LearningShared offer. And I think we had over 400 colleagues to sort of 4 events that we held around the country. And the value of that networking and sharing ideas and collaboration was incredibly powerful. And schools described the impact that made on them across the course of the year. But feedback that we did have is that hybrid approach was really, really important. So that face-to-face coming together is so powerful and so valuable, where we can get those schools in the room. We had cross-phase, cross-sector colleagues coming together from both mainstream and specialist settings. So our colleagues who attended last year asked for more of that this year. So we listened very carefully to that. And the follow-up events are really, really important to us too, because sometimes we know we can go to a conference or an event, and then we can have some amazing days, some great ideas, but then we go away and we get back to the day-to-day grind of our work, and then those things can quickly disappear. So it's that continued conversation, those follow-up events, that are really important. And the online platform that we have there, I think, was described as a treasure chest of resources there in CPLD that can support colleagues at any point of their career, and governors and leaders and teachers and support staff within your setting. So that's the hybrid approach that we see across LearningShared. And there's a bit more detail about what you'll have if you access the LearningShared offer. So you can see there's those 6 regional full-day in-person networking and development events there, and you can see some of the names of colleagues who'll be leading on those. And then they'll be followed hot on the heels with those follow-up events where we can kind of come back together and really dig into some of those case studies and share best practice from colleagues across the country. And again, that theme of building our professional networks is really, really important to us. In addition to that, we'll have 3 national conferences where we'll be able to take a bit of a deeper dive into key themes and things that we'll really want to look at for our school and multi-academy trust community. So one that's been heavily suggested to us so far has been preparing for adulthood, that colleagues would like to have that day where we really look at preparing for adulthood from the earliest years. What does that mean to us? What does aspiration look like within our school settings? And how do we support all of our young people, regardless of their needs, into those sustainable, really aspirational outcomes? So there'll be the kind of things we'll be looking at on those 3 national conferences. There'll be a number of evidence for learning workshops and clinics. I always find those fascinating. Alan's talked a bit about those updates there, but the ability to come together to troubleshoot with Blake and the team there and see the latest things. I know schools will be at varying points in their journey of using evidence for learning, so great value in coming towards those. And as I've mentioned, that learning platform that we have sat there that was so successful last year, the ability to work through that and self-pace through those modules and materials is something that can really support. And you can see again the names there, some fantastic stuff with Barry and with Di, Vegeta. We can see James, Janet Rose, Sharon Gray, some amazing colleagues contributing there. So a bit of a wish list of amazing practitioners to be able to tap into, sort of on demand, as it were, there. You can see the topic modules that we have there, and I like to look at this and think you've almost got a bit of a blueprint for school improvement there. If you kind of get your curriculum right and pedagogy, assessment, leadership, along with that reflective inquiry underpinned by well-being, I think we're on the way to being successful in the very important roles we all have. So that's the basis of the platform that we have, and again, you can access that on demand. Just want to share the dates very quickly before we start to get into the conversation with James and Di, and then on with Barry as well. So they're coming really, really soon. It's quite scary how fast the term is going already. And we think we're just a few weeks away from that first event at Swiss Cottage on November the 9th. And you can see that we have dates then across the year there in the Northwest, Southwest, Northeast, West Midlands and East Midlands. There's several schools who are interested in hosting us in the Southwest. So we hope to be able to announce that venue soon. And again, just to reference that, we'll have those virtual follow-ups straight off the back of that event at Swiss. So there'll be other activities to engage with across the latter part of this autumn term. In terms of the format of those events, so again, there's a really successful formula last side where we'll have those keynote sessions where we'll be asked some challenging questions. We'll get into those roundtable conversations. Ofsted is a hot theme for all of us, I'm sure. It seems to be very, very active at the moment. There'll be opportunities to hear from head teachers about their recent inspections and what works and their learning from that there. There'll be contributions from our host schools and sharing those case studies. But again, really the opportunity to network. And just in bold and pink at the bottom there, we had a really interesting conversation at the Tez Sen show on Saturday, and the power of experts by experience and how we want our work to be shaped and guided. And those young people with that authentic lived experience will be contributing to all of our events and days there. And that will be something we're really passionate about. We'll have a taster of some of those keynote sessions very shortly with Di and James and with Barry there. And you can see examples of some of the searching questions and almost thinking, what an opportunity to have the likes of Barry and Di with us, and almost leading you through those coaching conversations is a real gift for us. And there'll be exemplification and case studies to put those sorts of things into context from both mainstream and specialist settings. And just an overview, really, of some of the workshops you can see through on screen there. Attendance, Barry will be leading workshops on attendance for us, which we know is a real challenge for us in our schools and multi-academy trusts at the moment. So an opportunity to really dig into will be key. I've mentioned James, if any of you have ever had the chance to listen to James talk about engagement and play and the great work they do up at Sunningdale, that's an absolute treat. Again, we'll be looking at preparing for adulthood. What does that look like beyond the school gates, as with that National Day as well? And Cheryl, our colleague, will give us that taster later on this afternoon in terms of the work that she's doing across a multi-academy trust and how she can support that notion of inclusion in mainstream settings. So a real feast of workshops in the afternoon sessions on those regional days. It's my pleasure to hand over now to Diane and to James for an in-conversation piece, really, and something we started this conversation last year, and I think there's certainly a lot more we can do in terms of that idea of really understanding our learners. We know that complexity threshold has really shifted, and we have those young people presenting in very, very different ways. So I'm going to hand over to Diane and to James to walk us through a conversation about understanding our learners. What does that look like? So thanks, Diane.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I mean, that question says it all, really, doesn't it? Because if you don't place the learner and understand the learner, then your curriculum doesn't really wind around it well enough, and the provision then really won't fit the learner. But it's a really big topic, and I think what we need to do, and I think what schools do struggle with sometimes, is making sure that they are creating that flexibility around curriculum and provision that can be really bespoke, not just to the individual, but to groups of learners as well. And I think it's working. It's working in mainstream schools. It's working well. I see it working well. I can see it across trusts. I can see it on an individual level. So I know it works. And I think one of the things that I've talked to James about this, I mean, we talk about the hybrid approach, and that's like exactly it for learners. It really is about, you know, taking a scheme of work that you're using, or that you may be instructed to use, depending on, you know, what the makeup of your schools are. But making it and adapting it to your learners is the flexibility that is right. And I think that's the sort of trend that we need to unpick. And it is about how do you actually articulate with yourself and your all the stakeholders, you know, the progression of knowledge and skills across those different groups of learners. So there's no doubt about it. I mean, what I'm seeing more and more is that, you know, the mainstream schools are becoming mini special schools without resource provisions. So these children are in your schools, and they're not going anywhere else. So it is about how are we adapting that, and it's about thinking about the characteristics and making sure that we're not just focusing on the characteristics and a person-centered approach. We actually have a valuable curriculum that goes with it. And I think that's the key to all of this, is about the quality of your curriculum. And you can take all the different domains and you can show progression, but it's different and it's bespoke. And I don't think it's one size fits all. James, I seem to have gone on. I invite you into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have spoke about this several times previously, and you've touched on it there. I think the starting point for us as a school was certainly, first of all, accepting that no two schools are alike. We might have the same designation as other schools, but it's unlikely that we have an identical profile. Accepting that and starting to look at the learner characteristics that you just talked about, and making sure that we can define those for the groups of pupils that attend our school. So we do that in a certainly as a starting point, in a relatively simplistic way, where we start to break down what their communication looks like, what their cognition, the characteristics of their cognition look like, what are their social stages of play, where are they at in their social interactions, what's their ability to engage, and then ultimately developmental levels across a range of brainworks, and a kind of cross-referencing of that material to give us that starting point for groups of learners and what their characteristics look like. But I think what we certainly did here as a specialist setting was define that first before starting to look at curricula, and we're doing some work with the primary schools here in Sunderland, and I know similar programs that you've been involved with in places like Newham have happened, where we've put a lot of work, months of work actually, with the primary schools into trying to define the characteristics of those learners before stepping off into what the curriculum and provision would look like to meet those characteristics. And I think, you know, we've talked about that being such an important point of, if you're going to personalize a curriculum, even to groups of children, before you get into highly personalized learning, you've got to know those characteristics first.
Alistair, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just think that to go back to the point you were making, Di, in terms of, I guess, what schools are doing with curriculum, and sometimes that temptation to be really, really narrow. And lots of what I see within schools is, I'll see some schools who go incredibly narrow, and we're just going to bash you on the head with maths and English, and we're going to boost you to within an inch of your life. And then the schools go completely opposite direction and say, oh, we're going to have a very nurturing life skills kind of curriculum. And I think it's almost, how do we get the right blend of those sorts of things? And they don't have to be sort of mutually exclusive. I think you can have both of those curriculums interspersing with each other and running parallel. So absolutely, you can be having those PFA elements of, what does employability look like? What does health look like and mean within your school? How do we really build those social skills and interaction? But then we don't want to do that at the expense of having those high expectations and aspirations around those key core curriculum areas. So I think it's, how do we fit the both of those? And sometimes I see, Diane, some schools will say, oh, there's a brilliant school down the road, they've got a great curriculum, we're going to cut and paste that, and we're going to do that ourselves here. And as James alluded to, that won't work for your cohort of learners. So how do we really take a step back, breathe, become experts in those young people in front of us, and then build the curriculum around them?
I think, Alistair, you hit on a really important point there, that when we start to define the characteristics of those learners, it's also about having an understanding of what are the outcomes you're looking for those learners. What does that look like? What are the aspirations for those learners? What are realistic aspirations for those learners? Because how are you going to start to decide what your curriculum should look like if you have no idea as to what you would be aiming for aspirationally? Because yeah, you need something that meets, from a pedagogical sense, is going to meet the specific characteristics of the learners and engage them in their learning. But absolutely, what you need to then have an understanding of is, sequentially and developmentally, how are we going to move this group of learners towards those aspirations? Now, whether that be for children and young people with very profound needs, or children that are maybe accessing mainstream curriculum, it's about understanding what are our aspirations here, and how would we utilize the information about then having a greater depth of understanding around their characteristics and moving them towards those aspirations. What is going to be the vehicle for that? It's highly unlikely that's going to be something you can buy off a shelf. There may be things that work as starting points for that, potentially, but it's highly unlikely you're going to get something off a shelf. You need to really think about the specific needs at a very pedagogical level, first of all, but then looking at the aspirations of, well, how are you going to move that to where you want to be? And it's unlikely, like we've said several times, that something already exists that does that. It's even more unlikely that the school 2 miles down the road has got something that you can use for that. You need to be looking at which aspects of everything out there would be useful to help you build this. And what do we need to be looking at individually as a school, I think.
And I think that's where you need to be really clear over a period of time, period of weeks. What is it you're really aiming to do, and actually plan those composite goals. For some, it might be just key vocabulary. For others, it's going to be interacting with others, but also with motivating, interesting things that are happening around them, and how you developing that day in, day out. And you're doing this, for some of the more complex learners, you're not teaching them subjects, they're not in subjects, but actually they're doing things that are highly motivating and interesting, with an intentional meaning at the end of it. And it's, how do you articulate all of that?
Yeah, I think we do have a thing happening at the moment as well. And I know we've talked about this, Diane, around everybody has pathways. Everybody has a curriculum pathway, that tends to be the term they use. And what you title that pathway is
Yeah.
really irrelevant. You could call it
Doesn't
the
matter.
sparkle pathway or the seahorse pathway. It doesn't really matter. It is about how you define what does the provision in that pathway look like for the learners who are accessing it, and do you have clearly defined parameters around who's accessing that particular curriculum pathway? I think we've talked about that in the past, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah. But I think it will still be talked about, because as new people come in the profession, it's not about giving it a label. It's actually about understanding why it's there in the first place, and being able to describe and articulate the learners that sit there and within that pathway, and also flexibility around pathways. They shouldn't all sit in the same pathway. So again, you know, when anybody, you know, is looking at accountability and making sure that the provision is right, the curriculum is right, it is not a one size fits all. It has to be hybrid. It has to meet your learners, and very much so. You know, it's about your context and your stakeholders. But I think over time that's the thing we want to develop, to give people the rhetoric, to give them the understanding and the descriptors, so that they can help articulate that better.
I think, Diane, as well, when we look at that sort of question there, and Alan's just talked us through sort of 10 minutes ago, the kind of the new features of the app, and what a gift you have really with Evidence for Learning in the ability to really dig into the motivators, as you've described, and what learning looks like for that young person. So taking that step back and really having a look at that evidence in front of us really does help us to shape our provision, our environment, our curriculum, and that should be absolutely at the core and the center. And of course, if we do that really well, we're able to capture and celebrate those very unique learning journeys for those young people. And again, we see some great practice with schools all across the country and across the community where, you know, there's real currency to those learning journeys that are setting young people up for their next steps. You know, some students who are using that as almost digital CVs to be able to take into employers, saying, look what I'm doing, know what issues there are around employability. So there's really innovative and creative use. And again, the opportunity to come together as a community and share that practice is a real strength of these days, because I think as professionals, we all like to magpie those brilliant ideas and take them and tweak them. And what does that mean for us in our setting? And certainly the professional network and community allows us to do that.
Yeah, and I think just to speak to that, because it does speak to some of the other keynotes and workshops around taking that inquiry approach to understanding your learners. Somebody's just put in the chat involving multi-professionals and other stakeholders, which is an absolute key piece of work that has to go into defining this kind of information. But it is about that inquiry mindset. And certainly, I know some of the other workshops, my own workshop, will talk about motivators and specifically how we use those at Sunningdale. But that is how we specifically use them at Sunningdale, and how we use some of this information. So people will be sharing that kind of thing, but it speaks to this kind of use of EfL as a tool for better understanding and gathering understanding from a range of sources, which is really, really important in having a better understanding of your learners. And absolutely, sorry, it only flashed up on my screen, so I've lost your name, but whoever put that in the chat about it's not just about senior leaders or even classroom teachers gathering that information. It's about the entire stakeholder group around the child contributing to information about better understanding their characteristics of learning, as well as things that then might form part of your provision around understanding their motivators, around better understanding their engagement, their sensory needs, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Thank you, Alistair.
Oh, huge thanks to Diane James. I could continue that conversation with you guys all afternoon, but I'm really, really mindful of time. But some really interesting things to take away. And I think when we've had those conversations in the past with colleagues all around the country, we really have to think hard, don't we? It's a really, really big issue for us in terms of understanding that changing cohort of young people. So any opportunities you do have to come together with leaders and teachers and practitioners from other schools really, really is valuable. We start to form our own ideas and what that looks like in our school community. So a huge thanks to you both for a taster of some of those conversations we'll see on those regional days. Thanks, Di. Thanks, James. delighted now to introduce Professor Barry Carpenter, who's going to lead us through the next session that we have this afternoon, talking about an inquiry approach to neurodiversity and complex needs. We're so fortunate to have Barry with us, sharing his, again, knowledge and expertise. I know Barry's in demand all across the globe in terms of going to speak about various things. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Alistair. It's good to be with you all. I just love doing things with the EfL community because it's one of the most dynamic communities that's out there. It's actually a community that understands its children, is actually making the changes that the children need, because as some of you will have heard me say before, the children have changed, the children are changing, and the children continue to change. And I think since the pandemic, and I think probably this is why we're now getting more mainstream schools into the EfL community, we are seeing children that we never thought would have additional needs now profiling with those needs. I could go on at length about the impact of the pandemic. I'm just sitting here in my study looking at some newspaper articles which read things like wealthier children saw greater mental health decline in the pandemic, increasingly persistent absent pupils. You know, the national figure is now 1.89 million children persistently absent. We have high schools where they can still only get about 80% of year 10 back in. Newspaper articles saying things like parents decide missing school is socially okay, and the chief inspector, about to retire, Amanda Spielman, but saying the social contract with schools has been broken, and that's very much echoed by the children's commissioner. So we have this changing population, and I'm just wondering, listening then into the conversation between Alistair Dye and James, what they were describing there was about fundamentally the responsivity to the children that you have in front of you, whatever their need. But I still think we need conceptual frameworks that will guide us in that responsivity. And the reason I'm committed to EfL and LearningShared is that that is a tool that gives us that responsibility. It puts it in your hands. And I'm sure lots of you would agree, teaching is an evidence-based profession. It's fairly unequivocal. But actually, colleagues, and I can say this because I'm at the end of my career, we don't know all the answers. We never have, and we never will. Therefore, I think more and more what you need is, alongside that evidence base, is an inquiry approach that allows you to go to the new territory, i.e. that responsivity James spoke of, and design the pathways, again, that he and I were discussing, that will enable you to touch that child at their point of learning need. Lots of you know my major research was around complex needs. And I think increasingly now, complex needs is leading us towards neurodiversity. The range of children you have in your classrooms, you cannot have labels for all of them. It would be inappropriate. What we need is responsivity that embraces the neurodiverse in your classrooms. Next slide. So in the contributions I'll be making, I'll be looking at what does neurodiversity mean, because you can't do it, you can't handle it. You can't actually use it for and with your children to improve the learning outcomes unless you know what it actually means. I've taken this quote from an excellent new book that's out by Ellis Kirby and Osborne, which talks about the different ways that we all think, move, hear, see, understand, process information, and communicate with each other. We're all neurodiverse. Don't think anybody would argue with any of that terminology. It's not academic. It belongs to us. It describes our population, especially our child population. I would really recommend that book. It's so clearly written. It has some really good things, and particularly around self and self-determination. And I'd add to that self-regulation. There are too many challenges in our classrooms at the moment. We cannot solve them all. The more we can improve child capacity for self-regulation, the better the outcomes will be for the children. We can't, with all the mental health issues, have the full insights to all of that. Again, it's about giving our children some of the tools that help them resolve some of the challenging emotional well-being issues they're facing. And again, as Alistair's highlighted, if you go to the modules around well-being, which I led on, you'll find a huge raft of information there, if that's a deep dive that your school, in terms of its training, needs to go through. Next slide. So my reflections in the workshops and contributions I'll be leading to the various conferences will be around what's the educational perspective on neurodiversity. That's a societal term, helpful, but what does that mean for us in our schools, in our classrooms, systemically and practically? Next slide. And just to remind ourselves that, you know, the words we have currently about complex needs are about that coexisting, overlapping, interlocking, compounding learning difficulties and disabilities. And that these things can change, things will co-occur. We know, for example, young people with autism, 70%, well, that was before the pandemic, that I was working with my colleague Francesca Happe last week, and Francesca would suggest that we're probably heading towards 90% of adolescents with autism are developing mental health problems post-pandemic. And in fact, what's very interesting with her current research is she's getting profiles of PTSD that we never used to get in autistic children, and directly relates to what for them were some very vivid experiences during the lockdowns of pandemic. But that all leads to those unique and changing learning patterns. And what Diane and her team did so well with the Rochford Review was to address that and try to build in flexibility. Yes, the Rochford Review came out with the engagement model building on my earlier research as a statutory summative assessment instrument. But Di was very clear, and remains very clear, that it was also about engagement and as pedagogy. And if you listen to James and some of the innovative work he and his team are doing, you can see how the engagement as pedagogy is meeting the learning needs of the children. And then EfL is the conduit that enables us to capture momentarily, sometimes just for a few seconds, some of those attainments and achievements that are so often inconsistent in our children and young people. Next slide. So we do have this absolute tsunami of mental health need, and I'm going to blend in lots of things into what I want to say, because it is coming at us from all angles, and you must be feeling at times totally overwhelmed. And what I want to bring is some insights, some information that might help resolve. I've talked about children's self-regulation. I think there has to be teacher self-regulation. And as a teacher educator for many years, one of the things I want to do is build your capacity that you may not need the information I present in that moment, but on the day you do, you know that if you go to this very good book by Tutton Williams, you'll find some really interesting things about the unhappiness of children, how that affects their learning state, about their well-being, and how we might work those things through in our various settings. Next slide. So that's the book for those of you again that want to follow up that. It's about building up a rich repertoire of materials around us that enable us, that at the moment we need to move, we know what resources can help us to do that. I like their heart in the middle of that book. It reminds me of two things. One, that our children come with a range of jigsaw pieces as learners that often don't interlock. And it's part of our task to make that interlocking. And it's quite beautiful the way they've shaped that as a heart, because that then says to me, but we can only do that. We can only do some of the pathways that James and Di have articulated where there is compassion in our delivery. We need to remind ourselves that that still is absolutely key. We have some very bewildered children in our education system at the moment. I think we've got some very bewildered teachers as well. But we're paid to do a job. We need to actually be wrapping our teaching around those needs, which is hard when we don't always know the needs in depth. And again, I think the video capacity of EfL gives you, when you play it back, insights that in the moment of teaching, you would not have realized. Next slide. A new think tank report just out last week, again pointing out that children with SEND have some of the largest attainment gaps as a result of the pandemic. We've got colleagues to be moving more towards teaching in the moment. What is it for now? Not what that curriculum says we should be moving towards, but rather what about the nows? Because if we don't address the now, some of our children will not have the capacity to move forward. They're emotionally so impaired by what has happened to them. We need to de-escalate some of those emotions to find more effective support, particularly for our very young children. And I want to explore some of the thinking around the very young children, not to just pull them out as a group per se, but actually the hard research tells us If we don't address things with that group, then forever their lives will be significantly impaired. And as you can see, that's literally that think tank report came out last week. Next slide. So neurodiversity is a new paradigm. And maybe between now and when you join us for one of the conferences, and it's great that we're going to be able to get to so many parts of the country. What would that mean in a school like yours, whether it be a special school, a resource base, whether it be a support service, whether it be a mainstream setting? How's that looking? What's your current definition of that? Bring that information with you in your head, on paper, whatever, and work with me to mold and shape that as a dynamic paradigm, addressing current need in your school. Next slide. And to remind you that this is about inquiry. It's about shining the light on your professional learning pathways. And one of the great things Alan facilitated for us was the capacity to make these seminar series that are there. It's like a rich library. And I think I would perceive that at the moment, this inquiry-based approach is very much what you would benefit from in the work you're currently doing in schools, where teachers are saying, I don't know where else to go. I can't always tell you where to go, but I can show you the pathway that may lead you to where you would want to go. And there's 5 sessions available on the LearningShared platform, and I'll be touching on that in greater depth. Next slide. Okay, that's everything for me. Thank you.
Huge thanks, Barry, for just that insight into the latest thinking and research and evidence base. Some really scary statistics that you share there that we'll all be feeling within our school communities. And again, the ability to come together to try and find those shared solutions is so important. And again, as you said, Barry, we won't have all the answers, but again, being able to explore those things in greater detail with colleagues from similar settings, from different settings, will really help develop our thinking. So that's a lovely insight into, I'm itching for that November the 9th day already, Barry, to dive into that in a bit more detail with you. So a huge thanks for sharing that with us today. For the next part of our session this afternoon, as we move swiftly on, so I shared with you a number of the workshops again that have come and asked from members across the community who've said, these are the things that we're wrestling with within our schools at the moment. These are the things we'd like to connect with other colleagues and explore in a bit more detail. So we're going to explore just a few of those in sort of lightning talks of maybe 6 or 7 minutes with our colleagues, and delighted to have Vijita Patel, Martin McKenna and Cheryl Gorn with us to give us those insights into what those workshops might look like this afternoon there. So the first one in a moment, I'll hand over to Vijita, and we'll really start to think about evidence-led approaches to school development, including navigating a successful Ofsted inspection, and our colleague Martin McKenna will feed into that as well in terms of some of the work that he's done. And after that, I'm going to hand over to Cheryl, who again is Director of SEND and Inclusion across a multi-academy trust, JMAT. And Cheryl's going to think about how we support mainstream settings to develop that idea of inquiry and evidence-based approaches. And again, you can see a recurring theme across the afternoon here in terms of that inquiry being absolutely central to how do we understand those learners and really provide the very best opportunities and support the best outcomes. On Barry's last slide, he sort of talked through those 5 modules. So some of you may have seen that last year. There are a number of multi-academy trusts who are currently working on projects around inquiry. There's been real interest from local authorities in terms of what they can do around a specific project. So if you are interested in looking at that in your school or across your multi-academy trust, please do get in touch with Alan and he'll talk to you a bit more about what that inquiry project might look like and the support you can get from colleagues at EfL and LearningShared. So delighted to welcome Vijita. So I'll just literally change over slide, and a warm welcome, Vijita, this afternoon. I know it's been a really busy day at Swiss Cottage. So looking forward to, as always, to your words of wisdom, talking us through that school improvement and some insights around what that successful Ofsted inspection looked like.
Right. Good afternoon, colleagues, and great to be with you this afternoon. And actually, for me, it's been sort of refreshing to just get 5 minutes of Barry Carpenter. Aren't we all just completely topped up through that inspiration? So I've got the absolute privilege of co-facilitating a session with Martin, and both of us approach our use of and role of EFL in very personalized way to the context of our school and locality. What we're going to be sharing is what we do for school improvement, and also what we do in terms of recent sort of evidence bases we have from our Ofsted inspections. Thanks, Alistair. And I think the best way to start this off is with my favorite image of school improvement. You know, schools are busy places. We're such incredible ecosystems. The momentum is relentless. We are all balancing the culture that we want, the way that we want to empower and develop the holistic needs of our pupils. And also, you know, the last few years have shown that we are hubs for our communities. And so school development and school improvement is across multiple stakeholders. We're thinking about our pupils, the incredible staff and multi-agencies that are working with us, the parents and families themselves, but also the fact that many of us are carrying school development plans that are thinking about the visibility of an incredible population that is often highly marginalized. And how do we balance all of that? So, you know, it's a very important task that we have, and we know that it's very socially complex. What we want to do is absolutely show how it, you know, is very incredible and an opportunity for us to think about how we're able to do that as a collective community, and not that it's dependent on one or two school leaders to try to problem solve this. Thanks, Alistair. So when and you can just click them all. When I think about our school community and what we've got for our school provision, what we'll be sharing in this session within the regional and additional sort of sessions across the program is how we're thinking about quality of education, the way that we want to promote that holistic development for our pupils. And we're going to be sharing examples of how, you know, Swiss Cottage School has thought about the role of evidence for learning to be able to support and navigate those priorities as we think about the culture shift that we want to feel, how we're doing that through a reflective inquiry focus, the way that we can ensure the core principles and philosophies within our curriculum, our provision, our approaches to pedagogy are anchored through that evidence base, and how that evidence-led approach is supporting us by ensuring that systems and processes are taking the sort of reflective journey of the practitioner with them, so that it's not a done-to model. It's one that's very collaborative, because as Barry said, you know, the profiles of pupils is ever evolving. We are in this privileged position to learn about how they are shaping our pedagogical approaches. And the more we can connect colleagues across our school, the more impact we'll have. So how we're also thinking about evidence for learning as an incredible tool to balance that teacher workload, promote the sort of engagement in all of that high quality conversation, and reduce the bureaucracy. What I'm going to be doing in this session as well is sharing our recent experiences from an Ofsted inspection. And we can go to the next slide, Alistair. So that incredible call comes through, the intensity, the emotions, and it's how am I going to navigate this? And I can share that, you know, for us as a school community, you know, like everybody, we were feeling incredible pressure. And it was an incredible test for us of what was going to anchor us, give us control, and allow us to showcase what we do as a school, how we do it, but the all-important why. So we'll go to the last slide. And, you know, what's really important to us is our provision, but the pressure that sits there with inspections, whether that's invisible or, you know, very transparently there, I think what's really important is we want to be able to share what our experiences were. And I'm very keen to share the learning that I've had from our recent Ofsted inspection. And the fact that for us, evidence for learning was a vital tool in bringing the entire inspection back to what our school provision is, Why do we do it? How do we do it? And what is that culture and those core philosophies and principles for our curriculum, what they're going to see in that classroom. But actually, all importantly, it wasn't about a sort of experience that was looking at graphs, sitting in an office, etc. It was very active. And we had evidence for learning walking with us, with the inspectors throughout the inspection. That allowed the journey of our pupils to shine. It also allowed our staff teams to be able to share where pupils were at, where they were getting to, and how they were going to get there. And so what we want to do is give you some insight into certainly our experience as Swiss Cottage School, and the fact that EfL was a vital tool for us to regain that control, to ensure that the inspectors recognize the sort of 360 around our school community and how it could promote the holistic development for our pupils. And then finally, we're very keen. The beauty of EfL is that collaboration in the network. So ensuring that each of these events is giving you an opportunity to be able to connect with colleagues. As it was said earlier, all of us share an incredible sort of commitment to inclusion and very similar philosophies on being aspirational about an incredible group of pupils. So really looking forward to meeting any colleagues that will be joining the network events and regional events.
Huge thanks, Vijita, for your professional generosity in terms of sharing those. And again, that power of that professional network around us. There'll be lots of colleagues in the Ofsted window at the moment awaiting the call and maybe having those sleepless nights and very anxious, and in terms of what that looks like and how that plays out. So to have colleagues such as yourself and Martin so warmly offering to share your experiences and the kind of the good bits, the bad bits, what worked well, how that sort of played out is really, really comforting and really, really valued. So a huge thanks, Vijita. And I'll hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Alistair, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much, Vijita. It was great, obviously, sharing the stage with you previously, and I look forward to it in the coming months as we go to different conferences. I think one of the key areas has always been around that connectivity and providing really an insight into addressing what the community wants. We don't have all the answers, but within our community, serving all of our pupils, we do have it. So some of the questions that people have already put towards us: how can inquiry, engagement, reflection transform whole school practice, improve quality of attitudes, behaviours, personal development? Myself and Vijita, as we come to these conferences, as more questions come in, we'll present and provide different insights, different nuggets that we've collected as we walk around the EfL community. How is your curriculum designed to develop the tolerance of uncertainty, functional application? We would pick up all these little areas and we'll address these, and any questions that we cross prior to the conference, we'll obviously bring it and address it. But within our discussions or presentations, we'll also be looking at how to process change and change that culture of obviously reflection and engagement within schools. We'll also talk you through case studies and how we've done it within our own practice, but also some highlights, some examples that we've met and seen previously as we've toured the country. Most importantly, we link obviously to how we can improve outcomes for our pupils, and that's why we're all here, is to really improve that. And as Diane and Barry explained, what we want to develop and stimulate is curiosity into an inquiry-based approach within schools. To really understand our learners, first and foremost, then obviously develop that, especially given the flexibility we have in the curriculum. And we have a really neurodiverse amount of pupils, and this is only increasing. I was sitting in a conference this week, nationally looked at this, and we've had a 9.5% increase in education healthcare plans since 2022. And then 1 year, we've had a 10% increase. So therefore, we, across both special schools, primary schools, and mainstream secondaries, need to adapt. Need to first and foremost engage our pupils, understand what our pupils look like, and obviously then provide the appropriate curriculum and outcomes for them. So within our talks and conferences, we will really do this. We will develop and improve what processes people can tap into. One of the key things I would obviously like to do as well around that is look at specific case studies. And one of the things I've just flagged up on the PowerPoint today is how we have moved away from regards to behaviour, how we've moved away from behaviour plans into relationship plans, and how engagement and their engagement profiles sit within the heart of that, and how Evans for Learning then can add and support that to really improve, to engage and obviously improve people's learning. So I look forward to obviously meeting everyone over the next few months as we move around. So if there is any questions around that, around case studies that you would like to bring up, or any questions you have about how you can use EfL to improve Ofsted, please put them forward. But as I said, thank you very much, and we look forward to meeting everyone over the next couple of months.
Thanks, Martin. A couple of key things you sort of highlighted there. That language is so important. I really like the way you've shifted away from kind of behavior, and lots of schools I still hear talking about behavior management and moving that to kind of a relationships-based approach, which it just makes things more positive, more ambitious for those students and young people. And absolutely what you said there, Martin, in terms of, again, that cross-phase, cross-sector relationships are so important. We know that capacity in the system is a real challenge for us all. There just aren't those specialist school placements. So really having a look, and that segues beautifully, Martin, into Cheryl's session around what inclusion looks like and what they're doing at JMAT in those mainstream settings. And really looking forward to those sessions with yourself and Vijita, two very different schools, and those approaches to school improvement and how you manage those Ofsted inspections. So I'm delighted to hand over to our colleague Cheryl, who is at JMAT. Bear with me for a second. I'll just go back. Hopefully that's the right slide for you there, Cheryl, in terms of sharing some of the brilliant work that you are doing at JMAT and how you are supporting your colleagues and having that really strong culture around inclusion that has inquiry embedded throughout.
Thank you, Alistair. I feel that I'm extremely privileged coming from a specialist background and then moving into mainstream, and listening to Barry and Diane and James and Alistair and everybody that's been on, and Vijita, feeling that now I can use the skills and everything that we've just been talking about, that reflective practice, that inclusivity approach is really about how we can put that into a mainstream setting, because we all know that how demanding mainstream setting life is at the moment, and especially across our schools. We've got 18 schools at the moment, and growing, and with the complexity of our young people, as Barry says, we are we are learning and trying to create a different approach, and that's where I'm very privileged in leading that across our MAT. And just to identify how we've done that, just to make sure that we are being inclusive. But I'm asking my question of, what does successful inclusion look like in a mainstream setting then? How do we know that our aspirations for our young people meet their own aspirations? How do we know that the curriculum content is actually right for those young people? So what I've been doing, and it's just a quick overview of how I've tried to change that mindset, I suppose, to looking at that inquiry approach that Barry so kindly has shared with us. We're actually using that within our settings to look, and also using the 5 areas of engagement that that we've just heard about as well, and creating that engagement profile and how we can apply that in a mainstream setting to have that inclusive and that successful inclusion for our young people. So what I've done is that I've worked with each of the schools, performed send reviews with them, and from that taken the main parts of what the curriculum looks like for our young people, what they've considered successful inclusion looks like, and how then can we then move our journey on and look at that from a reflective practitioner and inquiry approach. So we've worked with senior leaders to embed that inquiry approach into their school improvement and development plans, and we've decided as a senior leadership group to look at whether we're going to work on a whole school inquiry approach, or whether it's going to be a one class first and a class team, or whether it's going to be a phase team approach, and really looking at how it's going to be best used for our young people within our settings. We are using the inquiry-based approach to create that evidence-based research that we found on LearningShared, which is an absolute fantastic platform, which please use. But our teachers, our TAs, our lunchtime supervisors, our parents and our children are all involved in this inquiry approach, and it enables us to have those reflective approaches, but also that dialogue that opens up around what does that look like for our young person, what does that look like for our group of learners, what does that mean, how can we develop our curriculum to ensure that it's bespoke, flexible, and also meets the aspirations of our young people as well. So it really is allowing us to have that approach that we actually need, and then with that in mind, as SLT, we've planned strategically within the across the year. Maybe we're having staff meetings every 2, 3, 4 weeks, and this allows us to have that reflection time, again those professional conversations around what current research is offering to us, and then how we can apply this to our own practice, to ensure that our children are and our young people are being successfully included. And we're recording this through Evidence for Learning, and we're just making sure that through Evidence for Learning we are creating those inquiry diaries from the inquiry approach, and making sure that this then is, we've got that common language embedded throughout our curriculum, our talks with young people, our families, but this is also then led to, and this is something that we were talking about as senior leaders, that impact around attendance. We're really seeing a spike in attendance now because we know that we're getting it right. So the evidence-based approach and the inquiry and ensuring that we've got at the heart of our whatever we're doing is our children, or our children's families, and we're just making sure that all our staff are involved, and really that's helping us to grow as reflective practitioners. So that's just an overview of what we're doing, and hopefully within the next conferences and our meetings, this is what we'll be looking at, but also how we've done that as well, and giving you a lot of formats to take away and try out. All right,
huge thanks, Cheryl, and that for that whistle stop tour, which doesn't, you could never cram in the amazing work that you're doing at JMAT there, but just a couple of things to sort of pick out from there. The buy-in of colleagues at all levels across school, I think, is really, really exciting. So to have, the midday supervisors all the way through to TAs, teachers, senior leaders, and everyone feeding into that is a really, really exciting thing. And I think your point around making sure that we find the time to have those discussions. So lots of schools that I work with in trust will say, we just haven't got the time to do that. It's really important, but we can't find the time. Everything is too busy with spinning too many plates. So the strategic approach to say, well, we're going to make time, we're going to strip away some of those other meetings that maybe don't have the impact, where we can have those conversations and discussions, as Di and James were alluding to earlier about our learners, is really, really key. And developing that common language is so important there. And I also really like the fact that the precision that lays the focus on attendance. There'll be, as Barry described, those sort of scary statistics. There'll be lots of schools and leaders across the country saying, like, we're really worried about our attendance and what that looks like. And that obviously feeds into Ofsted and all those other things, and the concern about young people who aren't in school and safeguarding. Everything kind of comes together. So the ability to hone in on that one area like attendance could be a really, really valuable project to do. And it's really nice how you have inquiry wrapping around that. So really appreciate you taking the time, Cheryl, today to share that. And again, look forward to hearing more about that at the regional conferences. So thanks, Cheryl. So that brings us nearly to a close. So just time really for reflections and next steps, really. So we've had an absolute wealth of input over the last sort of hour and 10 minutes there. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone, and all the way through from Alan sharing those updates at the start and exciting features of Evidence for Learning as an app, through to the conversation with James and with Diane in terms of how do we really dig into our learners and become experts in them and meet them, as Barry described, at their point of needs. We walked through the neurodiversity that Barry shared with us And again, some frightening statistics and numbers there. And my question to us all is, how can we be agile and responsive to the needs of those young people? Because if we keep on doing the tried and tested and the same old, we're not going to have success with those young people. And we know there are quite worrying sort of stats out there when we think about long-term outcomes for our students and young people. So maybe in the most positive of ways, we need to be disruptors, don't we? And change the way that our schools work to really be innovative around our curriculum and provision, to see those improved and aspirational outcomes for our students and young people. We then went on to Vegeta and Martin, and again, an insight into the way those guys in very different schools look at school improvement and how they've managed an Ofsted scenario there. So again, really valuable information for us, for those who are in that Ofsted windows. And when we are all considering maybe ourselves in terms of the evolving of our school development plans and what kind of things are we looking to achieve over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years as we do there. And then finally, a huge thanks to Cheryl for sharing that kind of insight into how we can maybe change a culture and how we can build a culture around inclusion and what that looks like across multiple schools, maybe in a trust there. So lots of us to take away and consider there. So a huge thanks to all of our contributors there for their input and involvements there. So just coming back to I guess what we sort of shared in terms of that offer that we have across this academic year. So that reminder, and again, at the very, very top of the list there is the ability for that professional networking to come together with colleagues across the community. The highlight for me last year, and we had, as we said, sort of 400 or 500 people come into those 4 or 5 events across the country, is the fact those colleagues made relationships. They were getting in contact outside of those meetings. They were going to each other's schools. They were picking up the phone. They were sending emails. They were sharing their practice. So building that professional network is really, really powerful. And as I described earlier, that on-demand opportunity for staff at every level across your school community, including governors there, to have those resources to be able to attend those sessions is a real gift, I think there. And also the call, we want to hear from you guys. So we're always keen to hear about those case studies, the brilliant work you do. And maybe we can use the LearningShared platform to showcase some of the brilliant work in your school. And in particularly, we want to hear from those experts by experience there. And we've got some really exciting things lined up for all of those regional networking events where you'll hear from our young people, our families, in terms of the great work that they do there. So that's just an oversight of the LearningShared offer. And again, remember, those dates are coming really soon now, actually, with that first one coming thick and fast, really, in a few weeks' time at Swiss Cottage and the virtual events off the back of that. So I'll hand over to Alan just to sort of talk through a bit more of the detail of the offer. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. So in terms of costing the whole program, as you'll have seen, there's a lot of different components to it. And I must give huge thanks to all of the schools that are going to be hosting, because they're making available their premises at no cost. So we really are trying to subsidize this and keep the whole program as affordable as possible for any school. So basically how it'll work is any school can sign up for the LearningShared CPLD program for a 12-month period. So 12 months from the point at which you take out the subscription for the school. And that costing is £500 per school for the year for any school that uses the Evidence for Learning app. So if you've got an EfL subscription, and then if you don't yet use the EfL app, it's £600 per school. The vast majority, if not all of the people on the call, are probably using the app at the moment, but there are those 2 options. And that fee gives the school 2 free tickets to any of in-person events. And so, as Alice has pointed out, there's effectively 3 types of event. We've got the regional conferences that are happening in 6 different parts of the country. First one's in a few weeks in London, but that is available to anybody nationwide. We've also got the national conferences, which will be looking at specific themes. And then we've got the regional clinic events, if you like, the EfL focused workshops that will be getting into the app and looking at specific examples of what schools are doing, how they're using the app, as well as providing a face-to-face forum for any support. Those workshops will be attended by myself, Blake, Betty, and the EfL team. So there'll be lots of chance to get stuck into things around the app. The subscription fee also includes access to any of the follow-up meetings that we have online. And so what we're trying to do with that component is, obviously, as a school, you'll be able to send 2 people to different events. Those virtual events will give you the chance to get more of your team involved in the collaboration. And also they'll enable us to really network nationwide. So where within the regions there might be limited to, per event, let's say 100 people in the room, those national virtual events could potentially take in people from all over. The final part of the offer is that with that LearningShared subscription, you can give access to the entire online learning platform, which Alice has alluded to with the 7 modules. Barry mentioned it, Cheryl mentioned it. And that's free access for the whole year for all of your staff and governors. So there are hundreds of schools signed up for this last year. They've been using it for the full year. So you literally can give access to every single member of staff. Your governors can have an account, and that's a 24/7 online learning platform. So you're able to access that at any point. If you wanted to send more people to any of the events, or you wanted to send people to different events, then you're very welcome to, and there's discounted prices for additional tickets for LearningShared subscribers too. So hopefully you'll see that it's a very, very comprehensive offer. But thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, huge thanks to Alan. Just as you look at that in terms of the number of opportunities there to kind of connect, to collaborate, to have that window into the practice of other schools, but then also to be able to have a regional session where you have an input from Diane, from Barry, from James, Vijita, and then on top of that, having those guys, you know, in terms of their recorded sessions and webinars on tap, as Alan describes, 24/7, you know, it really, really is incredible value when we think of the cost of CPLD events where we sort of send our colleagues out of school and they go to a day and, you know, one person goes, and then we're really reliant on them in terms of their feedback from there. So hopefully you can see the hybrid approach that Alan and the team have put together really does offer those opportunities of CPLD for every single member in your school community, regardless of the level, their role, and where they're working, their level of experience, and so on there. So in terms of being able to access that offer, I'll stop sharing my screen. So just to share with you where you can find out more and where you can sign up. And we've obviously said that it's going to be coming thick and fast in terms of those events, with the first one being at Swiss Cottage there. So, you know, we're going to be really looking to enroll schools and have people signed up, because they will fill up very quickly in terms of certainly those first events in November. So just bear with me for a second where I will share my screen and we can go directly into that section. So the joys of technology in terms of getting across. Hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. I'll wait to see if Alan can see that there. So you'll come to a landing page like this. There's lots of information in terms of things we've described today and the kind of things you can expect to see at the various events as we move around the country. So it talks through the virtual follow-ups there, the national conferences, and so on, a bit more about those pillars that we discussed earlier. And then there'll be a tab to sign up in terms of looking at things in greater detail there. So in terms of where you can access and enroll. So
yeah,
hopefully
there's a form at the bottom of that page, and where you can sign up. And then if you click through, once you've already enrolled, the form will disappear, but you can then also click on that banner and that will take you through as well. But if you get if you get stuck at all, or you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us via the usual channels. So myself, Blake, Betty, the services team, anybody. Alison, some of you deal with Alison, just any of us will be able to help you out if you wanted to get started. A couple of people have also asked if it's possible to have a little bit of a tour of some of the online resources. We can set something up on that too, maybe give you a quick sort of 5-10 minute walkthrough of some of the resources as well. If you want to get in touch, we'll be happy to do that as well. Great stuff. Well, look, thank you, Alistair, for taking us and leading us through that. And thank you to all of the speakers. It's been a really quite an intense half the term, hasn't it? And as we look to the end of this week for many, and possibly the end of next week for some, I would like to wish you all a very restful break, and thank you very, very much for being part of today's session. We hope to see you at some of the live events coming up. We'll stick around for another 5-10 minutes. We are wrapping up a little bit early, so if anyone wants to unmute themselves, stick around, ask questions, or even just catch up, you're very welcome. We'll keep the meeting open for another 5-10 minutes or so. But Thank you all very, very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you as the year goes on. Thank you very much.